past, present, and future of the church.
In 3 weeks or less.
And today is the present.
Boom.
Derek, I'm a Starr Redwine, the first man, First Presbyterian.
I was called that in a grocery store this week. I think it's sticking. I'm very excited. Let's pray. Gracious God, thank you for this day, for the weather, and for the chance to be together. We think of those who are not here, traveling, sick, hurting, lost, and alone. Be with them. Help them feel connected to us and to you. And inspire us now in this time. Help us learn from one another and from you. We ask all this in Christ's name. Amen. Amen. So this morning I got up really early and dropped my middle child off at a travel baseball game in Tuckahoe at 8 a.m. And then brought my 2 younger kids to worship at 8:45 by themselves so I can come up here and get ready for this class. So excuse the behavior of my 2 other children if they're running around. They were good?
They were great in church.
It's great to be here again. I'm just excited to have this chance to talk about the church and talk with you and hear your thoughts. For those who weren't here last week, we'll do a quick recap. So these are kind of my ground rules for all the classes I teach. Dialogue, not a lecture. Feel free to raise your hand and comment. We do not have to agree. I'd love to have a good conversation. I do ask that we respect each other's points of view. I think you guys are pretty good at that, but it's always a good reminder. Encourage you to continue the conversation after the class. I'm currently looking for work, which means I have lots of time. So, if you want to grab coffee or a beer or lunch or breakfast, and if you buy, I'll be anywhere you want to be. I would love the chance to talk with you and talk to you more about this conversation. I actually mean that. I'd like to get to know you better anyway, but it's fun to talk about the church. I enjoy it. And the last thing, when I talk about the church today, I'm not necessarily talking about First Pres. I might be, and we can talk about it, but I'm trying to think more globally in the larger church context. Okay, so I'm a big believer in kind of putting out there what I believe, so you're not trying to figure out what I think, and it also gives you a framework to understand what I'm saying. So some general assumptions that I am bringing to this class. And again, you do not have to agree with my general assumptions that 4 folks in my house rarely do. So, I do believe the church as we know it is in crisis. And besides a few great awakenings, when I say the church, I'm talking about the American church. But I think besides a few great awakenings in our history, the church is always a bit in crisis, always struggling to figure out who it is and how it's going to relate to the world. So I don't say crisis like, oh my gosh, the world is ending. But if you're running a business and your numbers were as the church's numbers are, and you kept doing the same thing, your board would probably find a way to get you out of the door and outside because you weren't addressing the problem. That being said, I don't think there's clarity regarding what the future of the church needs to be. You get a lot of smart people in the room who talk about church. You'll get a lot of different opinions, but I do think being adaptive and flexible and creative are key attributes for the church moving forward. This is a big one for me. There was no ideal time in church history. We're reformed, always reforming. I think I said last week, nostalgia is poison. Did I talk about that? I think we should honor our past, respect the history of the church. Amy and I love serving churches with the history. There's something exciting about that. But I think when we speak of the past in only glorious terms and don't acknowledge things the church has done or didn't do or should have done, we don't do ourselves any favors. There is no perfect time in church history. That's a really important thing to keep in mind. Churches are affected by demographics a lot more than we like to admit. We like to think that we're pretty amazing as leaders or preachers or teachers, but oftentimes what makes a church go up and down is what's happening in the streets around the church, whether it be housing prices or population changes or moves and shifts in the culture. So just to keep that, it keeps us humble to think about those things. This is the no duh line. Technology is having an impact. Shocked, aren't you? As I talk from my iPad. We'll talk a little bit about that today and a lot about that next week. I think I mentioned last week I've taught in New York City. I've served in New York City, Denver, Akron, Cleveland, and Houston, Texas. So I've seen the church in different contexts. And I have a lot of church friends. We are a very small group of people who like to talk church. I'm fascinated by Richmond. I think your unique blend of tradition and privilege, and that's not negative, I'm just saying your unique kind of mix here has kind of inoculated you a bit and delayed some of the cultural shifts that are happening outside of places like Richmond. It's not a knock, I think it's just what, you guys value tradition. I mean, I'm learning, Virginians. I'll be okay. But I do think change will come to you. My wife's from Roanoke. In-laws lived there for many years and visited. I like to call Roanoke the place that time forgot. Richmond might be the place where there are no watches, so I don't know. That's overstating. But, and last but not least, hopeful word. Talk to church leaders, read articles about the church. Change is happening. We looked at some of the graphs last week, we'll look at some more this week. The change is happening so rapidly and coming from so many different angles. I believe God's the one behind the change. And I find great hope in that. That all these things that cause our anxiety to rise, if we take a deep breath and step back, we realize, oh, maybe God is doing something here. And if God's doing something here and God is good, then I can trust that all will be well in all manner of things, even as I lose things that I care about. So I'm not a pessimist, even though I'm Generation X. I have hope for the future of things. Last week, takeaways. We did the whole old wineskin, new wineskin thing. You can't put new ideas into old mindsets, or you lose both the new idea and the old mindset. The wine and the wineskin are both destroyed if you don't. So if you have all these new ideas, but you don't change the container, you lose a lot. Being honest about the past of the church is important, both theologically, this idea of repentance, but also strategically. As younger folks get less and less confident and trusting in churches, institutions, churches naming their faults and foibles and talking about the past in a way that's honest actually opens up conversations and possibilities for a skeptical 25-year-old to go, oh, you don't think you got it all figured out? Well, let me tell you what you don't have figured out. And you take a deep breath and you listen. But there's something to that. And the last thing, we had to run through this quickly, but repent, replace, relax. Things you've done that haven't worked, haven't been faithful, say you're sorry for them, find some new way to address the issue, and then take a deep breath. God is the one behind all this. We are not the primary actors in the church context. So, clear as mud? You caught up? An hour and 5 minutes. All right. This is the passage we're going to look at today as our frame before we dive into some more demographic stuff and start debating, figuring stuff out together. But the Great Commission at the end of Matthew's Gospel, right? This is kind of the springboard. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. It's fascinating. In that first church context, there were people who were having a hard time believing what they were seeing. And Jesus came and said to them, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore, he said, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you. And remember, he ends with, I am with you always to the end of the age. Great passage, right? The Great Commission. This is what, if the church had a bumper sticker or a tagline, this might be it. So my question for you that I want you to, you might be figuring out how I do things. I want you to talk with those around you. And if the person next to you came in the car with you, you can't talk to them because you talk enough. I want you to think about it, play within your mind a little bit, and we'll share your thoughts. How does this teaching, how should this teaching, how does this teaching impact our understanding of the church? So how does the Great Commission, how should it, how does it, how could it impact the way we understand this enterprise we are all engaged in? Okay? 2 or 3 minutes, meet a stranger, it'll be fine, they're nice people, I promise. Very fun. So go. All right. John brings it. Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask a question in regard. You made some comments last week that I thought were good about your time in Houston.
Yeah.
And the intergenerational challenges you had at that church.
Yeah,
and
we're going to come back to that, definitely.
Okay, well, I just thought, just to frame today, this was sort of a good line on. I think our church is great about that. So, from an outsider kind of looking in, what has been your perspective on our intergenerational mix, and do we have challenges, and how do you tackle them as you did in
When
Houston?
I get that part, make sure I talk about that.
Okay.
Because it's coming up.
Gotcha.
And I would like to, I have opinions. Shocking as that is to nobody.
And you didn't really mean you're an outsider, because right here, all are
Oh, it's
included,
okay.
right?
Yeah.
I'm from Texas, I'm in Virginia. I'm an outsider. It's okay. I will claim the identity. So what did y'all talk about? Just real quick, just shoot out some answers. No right or wrong.
Teaching versus preaching.
Teaching versus preaching, okay. Teach versus preach. And a teaching line often gets lost in that, doesn't it? Yeah. What else?
Describe the end of the age.
End of the age. How do you interpret that?
Well, we had one interpretation of Jesus' second coming.
Okay. Anybody here read Station 11, the book? Really? Oh, read it. It's fun. It's one of the 16,000 end of the world books that are out there right now. But famous. She spoke at Chautauqua one year when I went, and it's a book about a flu pandemic, and then there's this little traveling group of Shakespearean actors who kind of navigate the American landscape after the pandemic when 99% of the people are gone. And she had this great line in the lecture. Someone said, why do so many folks write about the end of times? And she said, because the world we live in is always ending. I love that line. The end of the age, we think it's about the end, but we've lived. Things that we love and cherish have a cycle, right? And we're always saying goodbye to things that we cherish, and that's kind of, I'll be with you. That's how, I mean, you can read it both ways, but I also like to read that line as, every time something comes to an end, and you think it's over, I'll be there, and oh, by the way, I'm all about resurrection. So, that death, the newness is coming from it. So, what else? Yep.
Evangelism.
Evangelism. Are you Presbyterian?
Yep.
I'm making sure. I didn't want, if you're not, it's cool.
When we
You
talked
said
about
that word so well. And so
we
clearly.
talked about evangelism by
Yeah.
action versus indeed,
So word and deed.
word and deed. Yes.
Okay. What else?
Thank you.
How do we pass the baton to the next generation?
Pass the baton. Yep.
Can you go back to word and deed? I think it's the difference between the verb church and the noun church.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah. The church is an idea versus a movement. It was Walter Rangren who wrote that book about we started building tabernacles and we should be a caravan. There was a kind of idea of movement. We got stuck when in reality we should be constantly people who are moving forward. Yeah.
We talked about how difficult it is to take that commission. It wasn't just to those people there with Jesus, but that it's to us, and how brave you have to be in order to do that.
Yeah. So this is for us too. Yep. Yep.
We would talk about the fact that it's incumbent upon all of us to go out and speak the word or speak our beliefs, and then we said, but it says to baptize those that you're preaching to, and then we decided we get that too, because when a child is baptized or a person is baptized, as a congregation, we're requested to stand and promise to
Yeah,
support that.
and the Presbyterian Church has a unique kind of take on baptism. We aren't the only ones, but we can't baptize someone outside the context of worship.
Right.
Like maybe in a special circumstance at the hospital for a child, but if parents came to me and said, hey, I'd like to baptize Johnny on Thursday, it has to be in the context of the community. It's not an isolated event. Yeah. A few more thoughts, yeah.
Well, there's absolutism to what Jesus said, and he didn't mince words. He wasn't vague. He was just, I am the authority, I am the...
No, a lot of action verbs. Yeah. I am all-knowing and all-powerful, and I want you to go. And baptize and teach. Yeah. Yeah, it's very direct. Very direct.
This isn't a request.
Yep. No, it's not. If you're having a good day, go. Now, but to be fair, some doubted. From the very beginning, there were people in the community who didn't buy in. If that's not church, that's not 1/3 of the spouses. Both, either way, people, it's okay to doubt and be part of this. Yeah, a few more.
Oh, well, I said to Francis, you know what, I grew up in the Baptist church, and that verse, the Great Commission, is something I memorized. I mean, we memorized the scripture in the Baptist church when I was growing up.
Wow.
I
Is
know
that
it's
like...
a surprise. But that is my understanding of the church. That was the foundational scripture. That is why we sent out missionaries. That's why we did everything we did, was because of the Great
New
Commission.
church plants, missionaries,
Yeah, that was it.
Okay.
And, but I also remember that a very dear older lady who is long gone, what she said about the contemporary music, when we started with contemporary music.
That'd be nice now.
One of her, I'm trying to.
Well, you're Virginia, you'll say it very nice, yes.
One of her friends said, what do you think? And she said, I hate it. She said, I just absolutely hate it. But if it brings in the young people, I'm all for it. And
Yeah.
I think that's where we have to be.
Good save, by the way, that's good.
I know.
Pull me in and boom.
This passage says nothing about church hierarchy or order. It doesn't address the power dynamics that currently exist in structured church. It doesn't even say church should be a physical place. So the nomadic concept that you alluded to of 11 people or 12 people wandering around.
Yeah, when you cook and you keep sauteing something and it becomes more and more intense, what do you call that? Hot mess? That's good. Reduction. Like that. This is kind of like church over the grill for a while, and you're like, and it gets down to this is kind of, the rest of the stuff kind of goes away, but the essence, in my mind, this is more the essence of what at our best we are, but we've layered.
But I'm not convinced that Jesus ever had in his mind the idea of a static place.
Oh, I completely agree. Yeah, absolutely.
And so to me, that speaks to the power that folks through the generations have taken upon themselves.
Yep. That's a good point. Yeah. Last one. Yep.
You know, if we're going to go and teach everything that he's commanded, it behooves us to know what he has commanded, and to know him, to know what we're talking about.
So learn before you speak, before you teach?
Right.
Uh-oh. Okay. We gotta go on, but thank you, this is good. You've given me stuff to think about. Thank you.
Can I get one last one?
Yes, go.
This sounds hard. There's risk involved. This is difficult.
Yep.
I have to make a special effort.
Yep.
It seems complicated.
Yep. Sorry, I have no, yes. Yes. It is, I think at the end, I'm gonna come back to this at the very end after we kind of debrief some stuff, and I have a spin on it that I think will make it a little less overwhelming of a spin, but something I've kind of come to in my own understanding of church. You know, like I say, I have 3 kids, and I have a pretty high expectations for them. I don't expect them to meet those expectations all the time, but I'm a parent who believes that I'm gonna have high expectations, and they're gonna strive and they're gonna struggle and fall. But I'm gonna at least say, here's, go for it. I feel that there's some of that to this, like, go, you can do this, and this little doubted word is sprinkled in there, and the crucifixions in the background, that Jesus knows that this is gonna be hard. I think, I hope. All right. Okay, so here's the structure of today's class. I just want to do skateboarding in the sanctuary to raise your anxiety. I just love that. We're going to look at some present realities, so we're in the present now, and then we're going to talk about the challenges and opportunities they present. And then as we're looking at each one, feel free to shout out. Some will probably be pretty quick because they're just kind of obvious or not that interesting, and others might stir conversation. Usually the ones I think will be simple will take longer, and vice versa. So looking at present realities and then kind of discussing what challenges and opportunities they present the church. Okay. First one, Christianity is becoming more racially and ethnically diverse in America. Yay! The church is becoming less white and more diverse. In 1976, 8 in 10 Christians were white.
You mean the United States?
Yeah, I'm doing U.S. I'm talking about the United States. Yep. Whereas now, 43% of Christians and 30% of Protestants are white. So, and by 2045, demographic folks think that we're going to be a white minority. Okay. So, a little stat for you. I love Pew Research and Barna both do some great work. Every group, nearly every group, is becoming more diverse. Some at better rates than others, but generally speaking, this is a trend you're seeing in the church. And it's where we're going, not only as a nation, but as a religious institution. So the challenge, it presents places like First Pres. Anybody want to guess? Do we model those numbers in terms of our demographic breakdown? No. So that's a challenge to places like First Pres, to mainline Protestant churches that are predominantly one race.
But that will change. That will change because look at the group right here. It's elderly.
Yeah.
I don't mean to repeat. And then.
Hey, you said it, not me.
You can throw the rocks at me. All right. But eventually, we're going to meet that. We're going to come to that point where we're going to either bring people in from the outside, or we're going to. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a challenge. But I think it's important to name that reality, right? So I forget her name, but it's somebody who writes a lot about diversity and inclusivity. She's great. And she talked about diversity as being invited to the party. And I think it's right, inclusivity is being asked to dance. Mm-hmm. That the goal can't just be we want to get more diverse. And as we get more diverse, we're going to make sure all these different people operate like we operate and take on our assumptions about how things should work. The true diversity is not only changing how we look, but how we practice. And I think that's actually a bigger challenge for churches like First Pres than necessarily having people that look different, that have different backgrounds than us. We like that. It's when those people's experiences become equal to and as important as ours, and now we have to change things we like. My First Pres, and now it's your First Pres? But I've been here 65 years, and I'm the 3rd generation, and you moved here from Topeka. You know, I don't know. I always knock on Topeka. Anybody from Topeka?
Within 6
Maybe that's why I knock on it. I don't know. So this is not about assimilation. This is about inclusion. Okay. This is not about come be at First Pres, be like us, be more like First Pres. It's more, hey, come and be here, and then let's figure out how you change. Amy says this line in church: "Welcome visitors. We're different because we're here, and we give God thanks for that." Some form of that. That's a line we've been saying as a couple for a long time. I think it's really important to help people realize when new people come in, you will change if you welcome them, truly welcome them. Yeah. Any thoughts on that? It's a pretty obvious one. Kind of a nice, simple one to throw up there. Americans hold both orthodox and heterodox views. You're like, what is heterodox? Is it a cookie? Are you hungry this morning? Did you not eat breakfast? What I mean by that is heterodox is not conforming with accepted or orthodox standards of belief. So the old model of church was you believe, here's our doctrinal stuff, you believe it, you sign on to it, and then you belong. So belief precedes belonging. Demographic data would tell us if we keep that model up, people out there, outside and inside the church, frankly, have very mixed and sometimes inconsistent theological views. So if we don't allow ourselves to be a place where you can belong first and then express belief, and we make belief, a certain type of belief, the barometer, I think you're going to have a harder time attracting people. For example, Christians have a responsibility to evangelize. So strongly agree and agree somewhat is 46%, but more than half think we're not supposed to evangelize. Now I'd argue that word evangelize carries a lot of weight, and people don't know what it means all the time, but that's half of all Christians. And if you go younger, they really struggle with, millennials and Generation Z really struggle with me telling you what to believe. I think I told you the story, if I have, stop me. We're at dinner, the kids are going crazy, and Amy's mother spoke through her. It was like this moment of spiritual, she said, I can't believe you're behaving this way. I raised you in a Christian household. Now, my wife has never said that in 19 years of marriage, but she lost it, the noise was too much. My daughter, 14-year-old, stands up and says, are you saying non-Christians can't get along? What are you trying to say, non-Christians can't have a good household? No, I wasn't. Oh, I said,
Your daughter's very bright.
Yeah. Oh, it's a problem.
I don't know, she came up with that line.
Maybe
really
smarter than
like
Two
that.
preachers, she can speak, it's not a problem.
I have a question
Yeah.
about what you, I think what the problem I have with that question is what do you mean by evangelize? I don't think evangelize means I tell you what to believe.
Sure.
Because that's not bringing anybody to God.
But I think the young person doesn't see the distinction. And we haven't done a good, I think this is a little critique of the mainline Protestant church. We have given up the word evangelize and stopped trying to define it.
Extremely conservative.
Well, I mean, not even conservative, just, I mean, there are churches that are more pro-growth, who are very intentional about reaching people that aren't there. Mainline Protestant churches are not those places. And we don't, that word, for educated people like we are, that word evangelize feels
Nervous.
Makes us uncomfortable. It's just, it's kind of, it's intrusive.
Misinterpreted.
But I think we have to reclaim it. But this is interesting. My point is that people out there don't have monolithic thoughts. And then here, good works go to heaven, which is fascinating. The 28% strongly disagree, somewhat disagree. Like that is Reformed 101. Like you don't get to heaven because you're good. You get to heaven because Christ died for your sins. Like that's like Christianity 101. People all over the place. So there's not this monolith of orthodoxy that people are, and there are some places where there is, but I would argue, my sister goes to kind of mega church, she likes the music and the kids have fun, and she picks and chooses the theology she agrees with. She's like, I'll take that and I'll take that, but I'll reject their view of women and their views of homosexuals, but I have good friends and my kids are happy and I like the music. I mean, she's making a spiritual bargain every Sunday because she can go there and not have to buy into everything. That's a very different way of approaching church than 30, 40, 50 years ago, where you're Episcopalian, it means this. You're Presbyterian, it means this. You're Baptist, it means this, you know. Which probably never was as true as we thought it was, but even more so in the future. So that we believe, then we belong. I think we have to flip it around. First you belong. We share our beliefs, and maybe we come to some consensus. I do think theology matters. Like, this terrifies me. I mean, that sounds silly, but that terrifies me, that people out there think that being good is what it's all about.
That's what the media has taught you, but you can't, most people don't know about, you might think 101 is grace, but everybody else doesn't.
Yeah, and that's part of the challenge for the church. All right. My favorite one, the structure of American family life is changing.
Really?
It is! If you didn't know that, I'm here to tell you, the structure of the American family is changing, and you all laugh. But I want you to think about, I'm going to show you some numbers, but you already know churches, family life's different, right? You've got kids living with you longer. You're paying for your grandchildren's college. Some of you are, no? Bruce, we're talking later because I'm terrified. You're caring for aging parents. There's all this stuff going on in more single-family households, all this stuff. And yet, if you take a step back from church life, have we changed much of anything fundamental about how we do this to acknowledge that people's families are different? I would argue we still operate as if the nuclear family model is the norm. It's subtle, but yeah. And I actually don't see this as bad news. I think the American family culture has been shifting all throughout American history. Wars, demographics, poverty, recessions, repressions, cultural shifts, migrations within the country. It's changed the American family. Slavery changed the American family. The racism, moving west, all these things. It's constantly been shifting. Roles have been changing,
But government has changed the family.
yeah, sure. I mean, there's a lot of reasons. Government policy, but to not acknowledge that for us is crazy. So real quick, majority of Americans say that people will be less likely married by the year 2050. So that they think, people look in the future, most people say less folks are getting married, less folks are going to have kids. Those are all things that are mulling over in people's minds. This is too much information, but it's fascinating. 1 in 4 U.S. parents are unmarried. 1 in 4, right? More parents are unmarried and cohabitating. 1 in 5 households are multi-generational. Mom and dad are living with you. We've talked, we just had 1 out of 5 people you know have someone live multi-generations, in their home. 64 million people in 16. And this is my favorite one. We've got, as people get younger and younger, we get older and older, they're getting married. More and more people are marrying someone from a different faith tradition, different denomination, different background, Catholic and Protestant, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, agnostic. I mean, that's becoming more and more the norm. And yet, I think we said it last week, when do people get involved in church? They graduate from college, they buy a home, they get married. Oh, sorry, well, that's how it works now, but used to be, graduate from college, get married, then buy a home, the good old days. Have kids, and then they'll get involved in church.
Right.
Yes.
Yep.
People having kids later, they're having less kids, they're getting married later, they're cohabitating, so they aren't necessarily buying a home. So we have this mindset, well, Johnny's 20s right now, but Johnny will get married and meet a nice girl and settle down and have kids, and we wait for Johnny to have kids, and Johnny's 40, and now the church is ready for Johnny.
Yeah, but what happens in that period when the child doesn't leave home?
Exactly.
Well, how come he's not in church then?
What's our mindset when a kid goes to college? What's the church's mindset typically?
Yeah.
Especially in a privileged community where our kids go off to Never Land. We're living in, our reality is very different than most of the people. We send them off, when in reality, how many of you know 20-year-olds? I mean, they're all come back. They're all coming back. They're graduating like, hey, and they're here, and what Wilson and others are working on that here, but how do you it's like they left, and now they're back, and how do you reintroduce them? They're not married. I have been fascinated throughout my ministry. The people, this is a quick jump, my mind works this way, I apologize. The people that the church have the hardest time understanding are happy single people. The church has no clue what to do with happy single people. You laugh, especially ones who don't want to get married. If you're a happy single person, and you're happy, and someone's married and not happy, you are a threat. Why are you happy? You haven't had a kid in the family, in the house. And we don't know what to do with these people because they don't fit the nuclear family model, which has never been really real because it's thin slides of demographics, but we have to start thinking beyond our normative experience of what it looks like to be an American trying to make sense of life. And if we keep waiting for folks to get involved until they have kids, we're going to be waiting longer and longer and longer. And if we keep pretending like you guys are more involved with your children's lives and your grandchildren's lives your parents' lives, your siblings' lives outside of church than you are in church. I mean, I talk to people all the time who are grandkids are staying at their house, they're Ubering their kids, grandkids everywhere. They've got a college kid, they're caring for mom, and they're trying to juggle. That's the life out there, and then we come here and we segregate. We don't act as if we interact with each other on a regular. We want our time alone with our demographic group.
I don't think we segregate, we talk to each other. We must talk to each other in the
Sure.
church, right? And say, this is, oh, I got this problem, and the other person says, yes, I agree, we got this.
Oh, I think when you do engage, it's fine. But for example, I used to run a church. I used to run the family ministries program, and I'm passionate about a good nursery. I know it sounds really weird, but I believe in recruiting members of the church to be in nurseries. Every church I've served have the hardest time finding people to serve nurseries. If I ask anybody over 40, would you volunteer in the nursery? Can you guess what their response is? Been there, done that. Same with Sunday school. Will you teach in Sunday school? Not a little different here. You guys are, but I've had my kids. So the expectation is that people with kids are now running the Sunday school program and volunteering in the nursery. And guess who needs not to be running the Sunday school program and volunteering in the nursery? People with kids, because they're exhausted, just like you were. So, sorry, I'm getting angry about that. But, yeah. Okay. So I think the opportunity here is to stop looking at church through the lens of demographics and age markers and cohorts and to be open to non-normative experiences. And in reality, there's not really a normative anymore. And we can talk about the breakdown of the family in America and the challenges of that. And single parents have less resources, which is another reason we should be reaching out to them and providing for their needs. But you have to acknowledge reality. Is there a hand over here? Just scratching your hair. Okay. All right. The fastest growing religious group in America is the nuns, and they aren't the ones with habits. Nuns are people who don't affiliate. They're atheists, agnostics, or don't identify with a particular religious tradition. So these are folks. This is the fastest growing religious group in the country.
Why do you say religious?
Because they have a belief. Agnostics and atheists have beliefs. They choose not to believe in something. I'm being a little. I actually had my first slides at the fastest growing church in America is the nuns, and Amy's like, I tried. Too shocking, but it's not true. But I do think they're a religious group because they're self-identifying as not identifying. Does that make sense? They're making the choice to say no.
Brad Pitt has decided he's not atheist anymore, and he is now spiritual. I read that.
Yeah.
Alcoholism business.
When did we start caring about that thing? I don't know. Anyway, okay.
But you know, that trend is gonna get worse.
Sure. Well, again, it's interesting. That trend is going to get, what's the word you use? Worse.
That trend is gonna become worse. If you look back to the hunter-gatherer, the hunter-gatherer worshiped the animals because those were the animals that he had to fear. When we moved into an agricultural world,
sure,
we worshiped a God who gave us rain.
See, I choose not to see it as worse, as a canary in the coal mine. Like, to me, if God's behind the change, and the gospel is relevant and real to all generations and all people, this is telling us something about the way we're conveying the message, in my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah. But can I finish?
Yep.
I think the question is how do you instill a religious mindset in people who don't need active church and active worship to fulfill themselves?
Well, we all worship something, but that's, I think our hearts are made to
Well,
worship.
we do,
so
but how do we make it God?
That's the right question you're asking. But I think it's important not to see this as a worsening trend. It's a subtle thing, but I think it'll keep you more hopeful and curious. It's like, wow, that's a whole pocket of people who are choosing not to believe something that is so important to me. Yeah.
I do fear this because I've read that statistically the success of socialism or communism thrives in environments where there can be diminished faith in God. I'm also concerned because I did some research on what these people believe. I wanted to see if they believe, I thought they believed in nothing, but that's not it.
No.
And so you go on the internet and seek what they say and what they believe, and it's very ambitious and very aggressive and very adamant.
Oh, this is not a passive, like, I don't care. This is a choice, yeah.
Oh, and yet some of their arguments are things that we're teaching 6th and 7th graders how to combat or how to address. And some of them are very fundamentally wrong beliefs. That were you to have 2 hours of their time to talk to them about it, you might be able to convince them that that belief has fallacies.
Sure, and I think part of what we have to keep in mind too is, and this is not a knock on young people, but adolescence is going longer. We all agree with that. That is, so that period of kind of questioning and being critical is, I think there's a lot of that that's extending, which is again, not a bad thing, but I think it's helpful in going, you know, a 27-year-old today is not a 27-year-old of 1950 in terms of where they are on their life map. So we gotta go on, so real quick, this is fascinating. 2000, 50% identify with the denomination. We're at 30 in 2016. So people, they're not identifying with, again, that monolithic kind of thought. They aren't identifying as, they may believe, not believe, be a Christian or not, but they're not hung up on the words that we think. We know what Presbyterian, Methodist, and Baptist mean, we think we do, but they aren't really staying in those terms. And then, this is what's fascinating. I mean, it's really generational. The older you get, the more affiliated you are. The younger you get, the less affiliated you are. I kind of get exciting because now I don't have to, there's freedom here. Like, we can say what we believe and try to make a case for it instead of assuming folks are going to come because they have a baby. Like, if someone shows up at church and they're under 40, they are there because they want to be there. And I've talked to pastors of past generations. They didn't always know that. I see a 30-year-old in church, that person is ready to hear something. They are desperate or confused or searching or curious, and that's the kind of person you can work with. So I wish more came, but I think the folks that do come in our doors are really eager and ready for something real, which is, I've talked to older pastors saying that they're kind of jealous. They don't have to, the kind of social networking thing the church played that role in of finding jobs, and you had to go to church if you wanted to stay in your job and meet people, that's kind of gone. So now it's more about spiritual growth. So the opportunity here, I think we have to expand our sense of community and to include those who do not believe. Think of the Great Commission, right? Some doubted. It's okay to have people in here. And I think the young adult that raises their hand in class and says, well, I think that's crazy, and here's why. And we can now enter a dialogue with them and kind of, well, actually, this is what we mean by that. Oh, grace is real? Oh, that's what grace is. Well, that's kind of cool. I think this is exciting. We can't wait for folks to come to us because we're First Presbyterian. For them, First Presbyterian means the first of the things I don't associate with. You're the first group of all the groups I'm not going to associate. You're the first one. I mean, some people will still come for that. There are generations that'll move to a town and they'll go to First Pres because it says First Pres. They've been there a long time. They must be doing something right. But that advantage with this generation is a problem with the younger ones. Yeah, I think it's less about belonging to a religious group and more about practice and lifestyle and commitment, which is the teaching and the mission and the evangelism piece. It's less about being a card-carrying Presbyterian than as being part of a community that's for something and doing something and involved in the world. So, yeah. And
I just thought of something. If these young folks don't want to work for General Motors and General Electric, they want to work for a startup.
Yeah. Sure. And again, just to be fair, since I can do this since I'm not that young anymore, but I can pretend to be in this room. Sorry, that came out wrong. That was not enough. But they also, I think it's a fair critique of younger folks to say they want to start a job and have 6-week vacation and a full benefit pack. There's a sense of like, there's this entitlement that, but also it's so amazing that they're not taking the status quo as being normative. They're like, here's what I want. And you're like, I didn't ask for that when I was your age. Well, I don't care what you asked for. I think it challenges us to go, well, there's a directness that I kind of respect. Yeah.
So why can't the church go back to the real basics and say, God is love, golden rule? Let's build from those huge basics.
Well, I think it goes back to your point earlier. It's hard to go back to the basics means acknowledging all these structures and practices that have made it hard for us to just be about the golden rule of love and reaching out and serving. But again, if the church is being broken down by God from multiple angles, and the goal is to get back to the essentials, God's doing the work. God's the one at the pan. Reduction. So that's where but it ain't pretty sometimes. Okay, a few more. Shocking as it may be, millennials have a skeptical, even negative view of church. Those millennials. 66% say American churchgoers are hypocritical. Which is ironic because what's one of our fundamental tenets? We are what? Sinners in need of God's grace. Back to your point about misconceptions, hell yeah, we're hypocritical. We're people. So the issue is not that we're hypocritical, it's that we're acting in a way out there that seems to communicate that we don't have it.
Well, maybe millennials are using excuses to, brand the church as something.
But I think that this goes back to the repentance thing. They can sniff out, they believe they can sniff out hypocrisy and fake like that. And if your main issue is trust with millennials, you've got some serious PR work to do because they're skeptical. People at church are tolerant of those with different beliefs. 46% think that, only half think that we are tolerant. Again, fundamental tenet is love and acceptance, and yet people perceive us to be not that way. The church seems too much like an exclusive club. I won't go with that one. But that's that monolithic, welcome to my church, here's how we do things here. Here's the secret handshake. You can't park there. That's actually my pew. I talked to Mary Kay once, and she was saying the number of people that come to church and then don't come back because they struggle with what people are wearing would blow your mind. Like they come to church, going to a soccer game, and they're not quite dressed up enough, and they come in and they're like, I've even seen it get better in the 9 months I've been here, but like if someone came in with jeans and a t-shirt, would they feel accepted? I think you accept them, but there's something about the aura that might make them go, oh, yeah.
I get the feeling, rightly or wrongly, and I wonder what you think. I feel that so many, perhaps the vast majority of the young people who criticize the church are doing it to give them an excuse just not to come.
I don't buy it. I'm sorry. I think it's pretty fair.
You mean
I think most of millennials' critiques of us are incredibly fair.
Oh.
Existential crisis. I'm going to respond to your question. I mean, yes, there is. Young people like to make excuses. Old people like to make excuses. We all make excuses. But I think when you look at the fundamental issues we're facing as a culture, bipartisan thinking, either or, black or white, good and bad, racism, class privilege, poverty, and can we honestly say the church, with all her might, has addressed those 4 issues with passion and relevance, and at the same time make the case that the church did not have a part to play in the cultural divides, in racism, in poverty. So I think the challenge is, it's like the hardest lessons. I mean, I'll speak as a parent of a teenager. The hardest lessons are the one my 14-year-old gives me. When she calls me out and she's right, it is so hard. So hard to receive that critique. Who does she think she is to speak the truth?
But that's going on for every generation. You're kind of making it sound like millennials are the first generation to sort of say, oh,
they're the first generation to say it and then walk out the door. They're the first generation to say, I am. Now, the 60s were a little aberration, true, but a lot of those folks came back. But let me finish. So I think that, what did Jesus say? Let the who come to me? The children come to me. Like we have a choice. We can judge them and be angry at them and shake our heads at them, and there's some truth to that.
We all agree that we're hypocritical.
Yeah.
You already said 66%. We are hypocritical, but we're human.
Sure.
You know?
So we have a messaging problem.
How about forgiveness? We need to forgive each other
Yeah,
on this stuff.
sure. But again, well, we'll get there. Yeah. So I mean, I'm not saying they're all right. I'm just saying these statistics are the canary in the. There's something we need to pay attention. So, but there are some positive things. Yay, millennials! They actually are very hopeful people. Church is a place to find answers to live a meaningful life. 65% believe the church could be a place where they could receive answers for a meaningful life. So they want to come here and believe they're going to find answers. Church is relevant for my life, half. I can be myself at church, half. Those are good things. So again, back to that holding disparate thoughts that don't seem to fit. Welcome to reality, right? They can believe this and then believe this. Yeah.
5 minutes,
Okay. Solving all the problems of the world. I'll keep this one brief. So Generation Z, stupidest name ever, but anyway, what are you gonna do? Where do you go from there, right? I mean, Generation Z is kind of the end. That's my kids' ages. They don't distinguish between digital and IRL. What is IRL?
In real life.
In real life. They don't distinguish. It isn't the same. And it is. So how do we as a church think about that? This generation actually reads a lot. Number one news source is social media. Instagram being the number one. So my daughter quotes stuff to me all day long. She's like, oh, I read on Instagram. Well, it's not always true, Dad. Of course it's not always true. I then go online and check out the source. She's reading the National Geographic cover to cover because it talks about the world. Not our neighborhood, not Richmond, but the world. They're a fascinating group. We don't have a lot of stats on them yet, but they're also the generation most concerned in the younger generations about technology. They're aware that it's not all good. You know, the first generation, millennials, were like, here's crack, have fun. And we didn't know what to do. We're starting to figure out, oh, time limits on apps. Maybe a 3-year-old shouldn't have an iPad. And, like, we're beginning to struggle with everybody, but as a general culture, we're starting to have conversations about healthy uses of technology, and they're benefiting from that in a way that millennials and my generation didn't. You know, I grew up with no cell phone, no email. I mean, it's like, and my mom is the worst with Candy Crush on the iPad. I mean, I can't get the iPad away from my mom. So don't blame young people. You're laughing because it's true, isn't it? I know. All right. That's just the population by age, make you terrified. So 34 and under. It's quite a few people. And that's okay. They're always good. I'm going to end with this in my last point. So when they do studies and look at everything, I'm going to go to the next slide. When they kind of put all the stats together, Barna put all the stats together, 72% of people say they're Christian in this country. It's around 70%, it's just kind of stayed the same, identify as Christian. When you look at Bibles, reading the Bible, praying, attending church once a month, all these things, and they have their factors. They argue, Barna argues, there's actually 31% of people that are practicing Christians. 41 are non-practicing. And then 48% of people out there, what they did there was they took down, they're interesting things, I'll read them to you. If people expressed 60% or more of these kinds of questions, a disbelief in God, identified as atheist or agnostic, did not participate in Bible, prayer, and church, Barna, they marked on 60% of those categories, they put in the post-Christian category. So Barna thinks that 48% of people in the world, in our culture, are operating in a post-Christian context. Okay. I got no answers to that. But here's where I'll go with that. So there's 2 takeaways in this Great Commission I want you to sit with as you wrestle with these realities. This one is the promise. I am with you. I am with you. If you think you're on your own with this, we're all in trouble. Christ is with us. God is with us. Spirit's moving. Trust. The fact that I can sit in a room full of people like you, and you can, I can say these crazy things, and you're receiving it and not throwing things at me, you're showing trust. I can be wrong on some stuff, but your openness is half the game. Just being open, wow, we might have to change some stuff. So that's the first thing. This commission comes with a promise. I will be with you in every time and age, whatever you're facing, I am with you. And the second one is, go therefore and make disciples of all nations. Typically, throughout Christian history, we have read that to be, go into a nation and make them all disciples, which feels incredibly overwhelming. That's not what it says. In every nation, in every place, in every community, go make some disciples. Go make some people, 12 in that case, who believe what I'm saying, who follow my teachings, who have hope, practice forgiveness, are generous. Make people like that in every community, and you're going to change the world. I don't think Christ ever expected us to convert all the people to the Christian way. I think that is hubris and crazy talk. But I think he wants us to make disciples in all places, people who actually live and walk and talk the talk. Walk the talk, talk the walk, whatever. And that to me feels doable. So what if the shrinking church, the smaller church, the folks who are coming because they want to be fed, what if that is actually the intent of the church? Not to be a cultural powerhouse, but to be a salmon swimming against the current. To be little pockets of resistance, places where people could come and experience radical grace, mercy, forgiveness, education, love, acceptance, guidance, morality. Not so we get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and be 5,000 people at First Pres, but to be a small but vibrant player at changing the cultural landscape for the better. That's what I read. Not make everybody Christian, but the people you convert, baptize them, get them into the covenant, and then teach them stuff and make sure they live the way I've taught you to live. And that's going to change the world. That also works well with a multi-faith context. Now, plenty of folks will disagree with me, and that's totally fine. I'm coming from my perspective, but that's a way I can be evangelical. And I think Christ, I'm pretty all in on Christ, and respect someone of a different faith. I've been called to be a Christian. I'm going to live a certain way and hope that way can change lives and change realities. But I'm not naive to think that everybody in Richmond is going to be a Christian, let alone a Presbyterian. And that's okay. So that's how I wrestle with that overwhelming nature of the command. And again, there are folks who say you're taking a preposition of and you're letting it change the whole meaning, and that's a fair critique, and we can debate that. I have never seen a time in history when everybody becoming a Christian was ever a good thing. Crusades, imperialism, the sense of, but places where Christians live, talk, and live the teachings, wow, stuff would happen there. So,
we're at time.
Perfect. So I have to go to my son's baseball game, so if you want to critique or question, please email my wife and she'll forward it to me. No, seriously, email my wife and some of you already have, and we'll set up a time to get together and talk. So,
if you stop now, people will come back next Sunday.
Well, the future's next week. We're going to be fine. Yeah. That'll be fun. So, thanks, guys.
All right, thank
Cody.
Hi.
Nancy.
Good to see you.